Reviewing keyboard switches is tough because until you can try a switch out yourself, it is hard to represent the acoustics and typing feel on the screen. Moreover, for every new switch that pops up, there's an almost identical switch that's already in the market. Matcha lattes, alpacas, zakus, onion switches all have a PC top and nylon bottom housing with a palm stem. You expect them to sound roughly the same and might not want to purchase repeats. So the meta now is to create a secret proprietary blend, like Gateron has done years ago with their Ink series and Taxi with their PME housing. It is in such a landscape where Keyboom reached out and offered to send these switches over for me to review. Let me be clear, it is a very tough time to get people to buy keyboards now, much less switches, so these need to be really appealing to stand out. With that said, there really isn't anything special to point out at first glance between the two switches, the Emerald and the Topaz. The switch's stem and housing material are all coloured PC, nothing we haven't seen before. Price-wise, at about 45 cents per piece, they aren't super cheap like Gateron yellows, but also aren't expensive like Zeals or Creams. The only difference is that these two have different weighted springs at 48 grams and 59 grams of actuation force, which again isn't super light nor super heavy like the Speed Silvers and Ink Blacks. The only good thing I can tell right off the bat is that the springs in these are long springs. I've covered the benefits of a long single spring in another switch review, so I won't repeat myself here. Click on the banner if you want to find out more. Aside from this, there is nothing to talk about. Everything about this switch just screams average to me. But let's go beyond these superficial things and do some real testing. From the very start, when I noticed that this switch is made entirely out of polycarbonate, the first competitor or alternative I thought of was the Aqua Kings. These have been in the market for 2 years or so and are still readily available today with a similar pricing. Aside from the fact that these are long pole switches, every component in the Aqua Kings is made out of polycarbonate as well. So how are these three switches then different acoustically, if anything at all? One thing to highlight here is that these switches are all stock, so no extra lubing nor filming. It is important to note that the Aqua Kings come with a very thin factory lube, while the Emerald and Topaz are both obviously factory lubed beforehand. All three are nonetheless equally smooth and pleasant to type on. They do not have spring ping, but I find that a couple of the Aqua Kings I possess do have a tiny bit of leaf ping that needs some additional lubing, unlike the Emerald and Topaz. Aqua Kings are considerably lighter than the Emerald and Topaz, with the ones that I have here being rated at about 40 to 45 grams of actuation force. I actually prefer the Aqua Kings here because the lightness adds onto the sense of buttery smoothness during typing. Emerald and Topaz are however louder since they are long pole switches. Additionally, in terms of pitch, Aqua Kings sound the deepest. I can tell that the weight of a spring does not affect the pitch that much because the Emerald and Topaz sound equally clacky to me. There is, however, one important fundamental difference in the switch housing design. I noticed the difference when I was investigating how much the pole length affected acoustic differences. FYI, the Emerald and Topaz are slightly longer, but only slightly. While swapping the stem and the spring between the switches, I noticed that the bottom housing of the Aqua Kings has this additional raised height, which means that while the Topaz stem can fit into the Aqua Kings, the Aqua Kings stem can't properly fit into the Topaz, since it can't bottom out fully. This raised height definitely affects the acoustics, but I'm not sure how. I hypothesized that the additional height actually dulls the bottom-out collision because it adds mass to the housing. Unfortunately, there's no way to confirm exactly how the housing and non-pole stem affects the pitch of these two polycarbonate switches, since these are two separate variables simultaneously at play here. Generally, if you're buying a switch these days, I advise you to go for a great switch out of the box, without needing any modifications. Gone are the days where you need to lube switches for hours on end, unless the switch you want are the classic Cherry MX Blacks or Browns. And honestly speaking, the Emerald and Topaz are pretty good stock. Typing feel and acoustic preference is highly subjective, but what I can say is that if you're looking for an all polycarbonate switch and want louder and higher pitch switches, the Emerald and Topaz are definitely the way to go. Obviously, if bright colorways are important to you, these Keyboom offerings are also superior to the Aqua Kings. If you ask me, I can't see the switches after the keyboard is fully built, so I don't pay as much attention to color as I do sound and typing feel. But if you want to know whether the Emerald and Topaz are lower or higher pitched than a generic switch, you need to understand the concept of natural frequency or fundamental frequency. Fundamental frequency is what an object defaults to when it encounters a collision. Here, this weird-looking W is the angular frequency of the oscillation that we measure in radians. We define angular frequency using the following formula. And in turn, this gives us the expression for frequency. In short, the fundamental frequency of polycarbonate should sit between something like armwipe and nylon. Armwipe is stiffer and therefore higher in Young's modulus and lower in density than polycarbonate, while polycarbonate is in turn higher in Young's modulus and lower in density than something like nylon Pa12. Therefore, if you're looking for something that is relatively high-pitched, emerald and topaz are a worthy try. I usually like switches with polycarbonate in them because they aren't as down-sounding as others. It brings some depth to an otherwise really sharp and highly pitched switch that is perhaps fully nylon. If I were to choose among these three polycarbonate switches then, personally I find the Aqua Kings a tad muted, but I do love the light tapping experience. So what I'll do is get either the Topaz or Emerald and spring swap them to the 45 grams or lighter TX long springs. What about you? What will you get? See ya!